What happens when one of Hollywood's most fearless interviewers sits down with royalty who refuses to play by anyone's rules? The answer is about to shock you. This is the interview that nobody saw coming, and by the end, you'll understand why it became the most talked about moment in television history. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on. Because trust me, you're going to have an opinion. Now let's get into what really went down. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday evening when Meghan Markle walked onto the set of Watch What Happens Live. She was wearing a crisp white blazer, her expression calm but her eyes already carrying that glint of someone who came prepared for battle. Andy Cohen stood up from behind his iconic bar setup, flashing his trademark smile. But even he seemed to sense that this wasn't going to be just another celebrity chat. The audience applauded as Meghan took her seat, crossing her legs and placing her hands neatly in her lap. Andy wasted no time diving in. "So Meghan, welcome to the show. I have to say, when your team reached out about doing this interview, I was surprised. You've been pretty selective about where you show up these days. What made you decide to come here tonight?" Meghan smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, Andy, I think it's important to meet people where they are. Your show has a reputation for honesty, for not holding back. I respect that. I thought it was time to sit down somewhere where real conversations happen, not the sanitized, pre-approved versions we usually get." Andy leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. "Real conversations. I like that. So, does that mean everything is on the table tonight? Because I have to tell you, my audience sent in some questions, and they did not hold back." Meghan's smile widened slightly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." "Ask away," the audience murmured with anticipation. Andy picked up his stack of cards, the ones with viewer questions written on them, but he set them aside for a moment. "Okay, let's start with something that's been on everyone's mind. Your relationship with the media has been, let's say, complicated. You've spoken about how invasive they've been, how unfair the coverage has been. But at the same time, you've done multiple high-profile interviews, a documentary series, a podcast. Some people say you can't have it both ways. What do you say to that?" Meghan's posture straightened, and her voice took on a sharper edge. "What I say to that, Andy, is that there's a fundamental difference between telling your own story and having your story stolen from you and twisted into something unrecognizable. When I speak, I'm speaking my truth. When tabloids write about me, they're creating fiction to sell papers. Those are not the same thing." Andy nodded slowly. "Fair point. But here's what some people struggle with. You left the royal family citing a desire for privacy for a normal life. Then you sign massive deals with streaming platforms. You write books. You do interviews. It seems like you want privacy on your terms, but you also want the spotlight on your terms. Can you understand why that might confuse people?" The air in the studio shifted. Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think what confuses people, Andy, is that they've been fed a narrative that doesn't match reality. Privacy doesn't mean silence. Privacy means being able to control your own narrative instead of being a character in someone else's story. I never asked to disappear. I asked to be treated like a human being with agency over my own life." Andy tilted his head. "Okay, but let's dig into that a little. Agency over your own life. You married into arguably the most famous family in the world. You had to know what you were signing up for. I mean, we all watched The Crown, right? We know how this works." Meghan's expression hardened. "Did you just compare my real life to a television drama?" Andy held up his hands. "I'm saying that the royal family has operated a certain way for generations. The expectations, the protocols, the media attention, none of that was a secret. So what exactly did you think was going to be different?" Meghan leaned forward, her voice rising slightly. "What I thought, Andy, was that in the 21st century, an institution that prides itself on evolving with the times would actually evolve. I thought that bringing a different perspective, a different background, would be seen as an asset, not a threat. I thought that when I faced racism, when I faced misogyny, when I faced harassment that drove me to the darkest mental places I've ever been, that the people who claimed to care about me would actually protect me. But instead, I was told to smile through it, to not make waves, to remember that this is just how things are done." The audience was silent now, hanging on every word. Andy shifted in his seat. "You mentioned racism. That's been a huge part of your story, particularly after the Oprah interview. But here's what some people have asked. and I'm just being honest with you because that's what we do here. Some people have questioned the specifics of what you've shared, the inconsistencies, the timing of revelations. How do you respond to people who say that you've used serious issues like racism as a shield against legitimate criticism? Meghan's face flushed. I'm sorry, are you actually asking me if I weaponized racism? Are you seriously sitting here suggesting that I made up or exaggerated experiences of discrimination for what? Sympathy? Publicity? Andy didn't back down. I'm asking you to address the skepticism that exists. I'm giving you the platform to respond directly to the people who have questions. Those aren't questions, Andy. Those are accusations dressed up as questions. And the fact that you would even give credence to the idea that someone would fake experiencing racism tells me everything I need to know about how people like you view people like me. Andy's eyebrows shot up. People like me. What does that mean? Meghan stood up slightly in her seat, her voice cutting. People who've never had to think twice about how their skin color affects how they're perceived. People who can't imagine what it's like to read headlines that compare you to monkeys, to have commentators debate whether your child will be too dark. You sit here in your comfortable position, asking me to justify my pain, to prove that it was real enough, bad enough, legitimate enough. That in itself is the problem. The energy in the room was electric. Andy paused, clearly recalibrating. Look, I'm not trying to minimize what you've experienced. I'm really not. But you have to understand that when you make public claims, especially about an institution as beloved as the royal family, people are going to have reactions. They're going to have questions. That's not an attack, that's just reality. Meghan laughed. But there was no humor in it, beloved. That's an interesting word. Tell me, Andy, when you think about that beloved institution, do you think about its colonial history? Do you think about the countries it brutalized, the wealth it extracted, the people it oppressed? Or do you just think about the pretty dresses and the pageantry? Okay, hold on. Andy leaned back, clearly not expecting the conversation to pivot in this direction. We're talking about your personal experience, not a history lesson about colonialism. Meghan's eyes flashed. You can't separate the two, Andy. That's the whole point. The institution that I married into, that I was supposed to represent, is built on a foundation that many people around the world see very differently than you do. And when I, a biracial woman, entered that space and tried to exist authentically, the backlash wasn't just about me breaking protocol, it was about what I represented. It was about change, about accountability, about a future that doesn't look like the past. And that terrified people. Andy picked up his glass of whiskey, taking a slow sip before responding. Okay, I hear you. But let's talk about accountability then. You've been very public about the ways you feel you were wronged. But what about the people who feel wronged by you? Your father, who claims you've cut him off completely. Your sister. Palace staff who allegedly quit because of how they were treated. There were bullying allegations, Meghan, serious ones. Where's your accountability in all of this? The studio went completely silent. Meghan's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. Those allegations were investigated and addressed. But of course, nobody wants to talk about the results of that investigation because it doesn't fit the narrative. And as for my family, that's rich, Andy. My father sold stories about me to the tabloids. He staged photographs. He went on television again and again to trash me for money. My sister, who I barely knew growing up, has made a career out of being the bitter relative. But somehow, I'm the villain for protecting myself and my children from that toxicity. Andy nodded slowly. I get that family dynamics are complicated. But here's what I'm struggling with, and I think a lot of people struggle with this too. You present yourself as this champion of kindness, of compassion. Your brand is literally about uplifting others. But the common thread in all these stories, your family, the palace staff, even some of your former friends, is that you cut people off completely when they don't serve your narrative anymore. That doesn't sound like compassion to me. That sounds like control. Meghan stood up fully now, her voice rising to a level that made everyone in the studio flinch. Control. You want to talk about control? I have spent years being controlled. Controlled by an institution that told me what to wear, what to say, how to smile, who to talk to. Controlled by a media that decided I was either a saint or a demon, depending on what sold that day. Controlled by people who thought they had ownership over my life, my choices, my voice, setting boundaries, protecting my peace, choosing who gets access to me and my family. That's not control, Andy. That's survival. Andy held up his hands in a placating gesture. Okay. I'm not trying to upset you. I'm trying to understand. Because from the outside looking in, it seems like you want everyone to see your side, to validate your feelings. But you're not willing to extend that same consideration to others. Meghan sat back down, her breathing heavy. You want me to extend consideration to the people who leaked lies about me to the press? To the family members who profited off my name? To an institution that refused to protect me when I told them I was suicidal? Tell me, Andy, how much consideration do you think I owe to people who showed me none? Andy met her gaze directly. I think forgiveness is powerful. I think letting go of anger is powerful. And I think when you hold on to this much rage, this much bitterness, it starts to define you more than anything you actually accomplish. Meghan's laugh was sharp and bitter. There it is. There's the narrative. The angry woman. The difficult woman. God forbid a woman stands up for herself without being accused of being consumed by rage. You know what, Andy? I am angry. I'm angry that I have to sit here and justify my humanity. I'm angry that every decision I make is scrutinized and twisted. I'm angry that I can't protect my children from the same machine that tried to destroy me. And you know what? I'm not going to apologize for that anger because it's justified. The audience began to murmur. Some in support, others in shock. Andy glanced at his producer off camera, then back at Meghan. Look, I respect your anger, I do, but at some point, don't you have to ask yourself if maybe, just maybe, some of the criticism you receive is valid? Not all of it, but some of it. Meghan's eyes narrowed. Which criticism exactly do you think is valid, Andy? Be specific. Because I'd love to know which parts of my character assassination you think I deserve. Andy shifted uncomfortably. I think the perception that you and your husband complain a lot while living in a mansion in California is valid. I think the perception that you left the royal family but can't stop talking about them is valid. I think the perception that you want all the benefits of fame without any of the scrutiny is valid. Meghan stood up again, this time taking a step toward Andy. First of all, we don't live in a mansion. We live in a home that we purchased with our own money, money we earned, not money from taxpayers. Second, we don't complain. We tell the truth about what happened to us. There's a difference. And third, the only reason we have to keep talking about it is because people like you keep bringing it up. Keep questioning it. Keep trying to poke holes in our story as if our trauma is up for debate. Andy stood as well, matching her energy. Your trauma is not up for debate, but your actions are. That's the price of being a public figure. Meghan, you can't control how people perceive you. Meghan stepped closer. I'm not trying to control how people perceive me. I'm trying to correct the record when lies are told. I'm trying to protect my family from harassment. I'm trying to live a life that's authentic to who I am. And if that makes me difficult, if that makes me controversial, then so be it. But I will not sit quietly while people rewrite my story to fit their agendas. Andy crossed his arms. And what about your agenda, Meghan? Because from where I'm sitting, everything you do is calculated. Every interview, every appearance, every statement, it's all part of a bigger strategy. You can't tell me it's not. Meghan's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet tone. Of course it's strategic. Andy, I learned from the best. I watched an institution that has survived for centuries through careful image management, through strategic silence, through calculated moves. The difference is, my strategy is about truth. Theirs is about preservation at any cost. And if being strategic about telling my truth makes me manipulative in your eyes, then I guess we just have a fundamental disagreement about what authenticity means. Andy shook his head. I just think there's a lot of contradiction in what you're saying. You want privacy, but you court publicity. You want to be left alone, but you keep inserting yourself into the conversation. You want to move forward, but you keep looking back. At some point, you have to pick a lane. Meghan's face was flushed with emotion now. I don't have to pick anything. I don't have to fit into your neat little boxes of what you think I should be. I can be complex. I can be contradictory. I can be healing while still being hurt. I can want peace while still fighting for justice. That's called being human, Andy. Maybe you should try it sometime. Andy's face darkened, his usual playful demeanor completely gone now. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Meghan. The second someone challenges you, they become the enemy. they become part of the problem. You can't have a conversation with someone who thinks anyone who doesn't agree with them is attacking them. Meghan pointed a finger at him, her voice shaking with emotion. You're not challenging me, Andy. You're cross-examining me. You're treating me like I'm on trial for the crime of not accepting mistreatment. Every question you've asked has been designed to make me defend myself, to justify my existence, to prove that I'm worthy of basic respect. That's not journalism. That's harassment dressed up as an interview. Andy threw his hands up. This is unbelievable. I've interviewed thousands of people on this show. Celebrities, politicians, real housewives who've done far more controversial things than you. And somehow, you're the only one who thinks that answering direct questions is harassment. Do you hear yourself right now? Meghan's voice rose to match his. Those people you interviewed, Andy, did they face death threats? Did they have their mental health used as a punchline? Did they watch their newborn child be discussed like a prop in someone else's narrative? No, so forgive me if I don't think my situation is comparable to someone who threw wine at a dinner party. Andy stepped back toward his seat, his jaw tight. You know what? You're right. Your situation is unique. You married a prince. You got a fairy tale wedding watched by billions. You had every opportunity in the world, and you walked away from it. And instead of just living your life quietly, you've spent years making sure everyone knows how victimized you were. That's what makes people frustrated, Meghan. Not that you left. Not even that you spoke out. It's the constant positioning of yourself as the underdog when you're living a life most people can't even dream of. Meghan's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. You think having money means you can't suffer? You think living in a nice house means you weren't suicidal? You think having a platform means you don't deserve to use it to tell your truth? This is the problem, Andy. People like you think that because I'm not destitute, because I'm not silent, because I'm not grateful enough for the scraps of humanity I was offered, that my pain isn't real. Well, I'm here to tell you that pain doesn't discriminate based on your bank account. And trauma doesn't care about your zip code. Andy sat down heavily in his chair. I'm not saying your pain isn't real. I'm saying that at some point, you have to stop letting it define you. You have to stop using it as a weapon against anyone who questions you. Meghan wiped her eyes, smudging her mascara slightly. I use my voice as a weapon against injustice. If you can't tell the difference, that says more about you than it does about me. The audience was completely transfixed now. Some people visibly uncomfortable, others leaning forward in their seats. Andy looked directly into the camera, then back at Meghan. Okay, let's try this a different way. What do you actually want, Meghan? At the end of the day, when all is said and done, what is it that you're trying to achieve with all of this? Because I'm genuinely trying to understand. Meghan took a deep breath, composing herself slightly. What I want is for people to understand that you can't bully someone into silence, and then act surprised when they find their voice. I want the systems that protect abusers and punish victims to be dismantled. I want my children to grow up in a world where they're judged by their character, not by the color of their skin or the family they were born into. I want to use whatever platform I have to make things better, even if it makes people uncomfortable. That's what I want. Andy nodded slowly. That's a noble answer. But here's my question. Can you achieve any of that while you're still so focused on settling scores with your past? Can you move forward while you're still clutching onto every slight, every hurt, every injustice? Meghan's voice was firm. I'm not clutching on to anything. I'm carrying my truth with me. There's a difference. You don't get to decide when I'm healed enough, when I've moved on enough, when I'm palatable enough for public consumption. My healing is not a performance for your comfort. Andy leaned forward again. But it kind of is, though, because you've made it public. You've shared it on television, in podcasts, in interviews. You've written about it, talked about it, analyzed it. At that point, people get to have opinions about it. That's just how this works. Meghan shook her head firmly. People can have opinions about my story. What they can't do is tell me how to tell it. They can't dictate my timeline for healing. They can't demand that I package my trauma in a way that makes them feel better about their own complicity in it. Andy's voice took on an edge of frustration. Their complicity? So now everyone who has questions about your narrative is complicit in your trauma. Do you not see how that shuts down any possibility of real dialogue? Meghan stood up once more, her entire body tense. Real dialogue requires good faith, Andy, and nothing about this conversation has felt like good faith. You invited me here under the guise of having an honest conversation. But what you really wanted was to trap me, to get me to say something you could use against me, to create a moment that would go viral for all the wrong reasons. Well, congratulations. You got your moment. Andy stood as well, his voice rising. I invited you here to answer questions that people genuinely have. If you can't handle that without accusing me of setting traps, then maybe you're not as ready for honest conversation as you think you are. Meghan grabbed her purse from beside her chair. I'm ready for honest conversation. What I'm not ready for is being ambushed by someone who's already decided I'm guilty of being too much, too loud, too honest, too real. You want me to be sorry for not staying silent? You want me to apologize for surviving? And I won't do it. Not for you, not for anyone. Andy's voice was sharp now. Nobody's asking you to apologize for surviving. They're asking you to take some responsibility for your part in all of this. To acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, you're not the only person in your story who matters. Meghan turned to face him fully, her voice breaking slightly. I have taken responsibility. I've owned my mistakes, my flaws, my shortcomings, but what I won't do is take responsibility for other people's hatred. I won't take responsibility for institutional racism. I won't take responsibility for a media that profits off cruelty. And I certainly won't take responsibility for people who are more invested in tearing me down than in understanding what actually happened. Andy spread his arms wide. Then what are we doing here, Meghan? What was the point of this if you're just going to shut down every question that makes you uncomfortable? Meghan's voice was steady, despite the tears streaming down her face now. The point was to show people exactly what I've been saying all along, that no matter what I do, no matter how I explain myself, no matter how much evidence I provide, there will always be people who need me to be the villain. Because if I'm not the villain, then they have to examine their own biases, their own prejudices, their own complicity. And that's too uncomfortable for most people to face. The two stood facing each other, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Andy's voice dropped lower. I really hope you find peace, Meghan. I genuinely do, because this, what you're doing right now, this isn't peace. This is war. And I don't think you're going to win it the way you think you are. Meghan wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her voice surprisingly calm now. I'm not trying to win anything, Andy. I'm trying to survive with my dignity intact. And if that looks like war to you, then maybe you should ask yourself why my self-preservation feels like an attack. She turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly in the silent studio. Andy called after her. Meghan, we're still recording. You can't just leave. She paused at the edge of the stage, turning back one last time. Watch me. And with that, Meghan Markle walked off the set of Watch What Happens Live, leaving Andy Cohen standing alone behind his bar, the audience in stunned silence, and millions of viewers at home knowing they had just witnessed something that would be analyzed, debated, and discussed for years to come. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath. As Andy slowly sat back down, shaking his head in disbelief. Whatever people thought about what had just transpired, one thing was undeniable. This was an interview that neither participant would ever forget, and neither would anyone who watched it. Now, I want to hear from you. After watching this explosive confrontation, who do you think was in the right? Was Andy out of line with his questions? Or was Meghan too defensive? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure you subscribe, because we're going to be breaking down every moment of this interview in our next video. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss it.